Hey guys, welcome back. Real quick today, what we're going to talk about is some historical monopolies. We talked about the four market structures and we've talked about business structure um, in a sense of understanding the types of businesses and U.S. history. You should have talked about vertical and horizontal integration, which is going to pop up today. But, with the historical monopolies, I want to kind of get going. As a refresher, monopolies exist when there is a single firm that dominates the market for a good or service. The price in that monopoly is 100% controlled by that firm that has the dominant market share. Right? They can do whatever they want to that price. It does not matter what they do to that price. The customers that depend upon it will continue to depend upon it. One thing to look at is Comcast and their business practices, and I only use Comcast because they're the only cable company I've had, right? Which kind of speaks to slightly a monopoly. But with Comcast, they bring you in on an introductory rate. Here are these 150 channels, $80 a month. Here you go. You're good. Here's your internet. It comes with it. And then after about 6 months, they tend to jack the price up to about $150. Usually it's with little notice, and they just kind of bring that upon you, and they basically have control over you. They know that, in your area there may not be another cable provider, and that's what they have to make sure that they do, right? So cable companies can tend to kind of do similar actions like that. The United States has always valued competition between firms. They've always seen the competition as a necessity, right? If we think back to Revolutionary War times, you're looking at competition between, well, the colonies and the British in the way of who has the right to tax. So, one thing that I need to make very clear are monopolies are not illegal in the United States. If you can run a monopoly, you're in a good position and they're not illegal. But there are times where a monopoly may overstep its boundaries and start to practice unfair business practices or unfair consumer practices, in which case the United States government tends to step in. But monopolies are not illegal. All right, so today I really want to talk about three historical monopolies, and these are big ones that are still sort of relevant today. Well, two are pretty relevant, but one is kind of not as relevant. And those are the railroads, Microsoft, and IBM. So a company becomes a monopoly basically by controlling an aspect of the market. There needs to be a few things involved with that in order for that to happen, and that would be high barriers to entry, patent rights over some certain products, so that even if somebody else can get into the market, they cannot create that near perfect substitute, and there needs to be few close substitutes to it. So a great example would be IBM. When IBM started, there were some other substitutes, but they started to kind of make these products, and they always hired engineers that thought on the forefront of innovation. So they were always innovating and putting themselves a step ahead, and they got those patent rights, and nobody else could duplicate it, and they just kept going and going and going and growing and growing and growing and making millions upon billions of dollars. So the rise of the railroads began in the 1800s. We didn't see a lot of railroads in the United States before the 1800s, but started to kind of see railroads coming together a little bit, after that. And what you started to see is you started to see around 1850 people heading west. Think of the 49ers, 1849, California, Gold Rush, all that stuff. The West was becoming populated. This is post Manifest Destiny. This is post that expansionism of the United States from sea to shining sea. And now we had people starting to kind of fill those spaces in. Now, we weren't quite to the land grant era where people started kind of getting free land if they made improvements upon it, but people were heading west, and that's really important, right? Farmers and companies needed the rails. You started to see companies kind of come together and agree and fight over, you know, who would be able to build the transcontinental railroad. You look at something like the Gadsden Purchase, where the United States purchased the lower boundaries of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California from Mexico because they wanted to have a southern railroad. This was, just slightly before, or during the Civil War, where the South and the North were pretty divided. Ultimately, we would build the transcontinental railroad through more of the middle of the United States, coming from um, the Nebraska area and heading over to Sacramento. But farmers, companies, they needed this. If I'm building stuff and shipping stuff, I don't have roads yet. I could go horseback or I could go iron horse, the railroad. A lot of times, iron horse was the way to go. It was a little bit faster, a little more dependable. So railroads became big business, and you started to see the railroads depending upon other companies to create and maintain and have these successes. And a few pioneers realized that if they did the peripheral industries, that they started to purchase up the industries that supplied it, the supply chain of the railroads, that they could be extremely successful and that they could bargain with their employees, that they could drop the price of labor, that they could raise the price of shipping, and everything would be cool. They all gained that power, right? A few railroad families started to purchase up other railroads as well, and that would be the more vertical. And you just started to see this railroad industry becoming a big business, and Wall Street took notice. They started providing capital for these railroad families so that they could increase their market share and kind of get to that point of monopoly. Because what it meant in the long run was profits for the people on Wall Street. So all was good, and they started pushing that way. Again, you could now see, how the railroads would start controlling prices. There's not as many. They control everything. And they started to control the prices. They started to lower the cost of labor, increase the cost of shipping goods on the railroad or travel on the railroad. And they used these profits, and they were making massive profits. They used these profits to control the politics, to put people sympathetic with their cause into power. Failure to do that would have probably led to these railroads being called out for illegal actions prior to, the first one in 1905. But again, what you see is you start to see that they are in complete control, and they are making money, and they're putting their friends in a position to make decisions about the legality of their company. They've got complete control. Classic monopoly, extending over beyond economics and into politics as well. So, 1877, Supreme Court heard case 1 v. Illinois. And what happened was they decided that, yeah, you know what, Illinois can control prices. And ultimately, that opened the door for regulation. So in 1887, the Interstate Commerce Act was passed. And what that did is created the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was given jurisdiction to investigate unfair business practices as long as they crossed the state lines. If you did unfair business practices in your own state, like Indiana or Michigan, and you never interacted with another state, the Interstate Commerce Commission could do nothing. They couldn't do anything to you. They had very little power, right? Which led to problems with the Interstate Commerce Act and the Interstate Commerce Commission, was that they had no power, they had no support, and the states still held more rights. The states could decide these things rather than the federal government agency put into place. Things would change when Teddy Roosevelt became president after William McKinley's death in 1901. He immediately went after J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities. Northern Securities was a railroad company that controlled almost 75% of railroad lines in the northern half of the United States. So J.P. Morgan was in this, and he kind of had an idea, and basically the telegram came that you're going to be under investigation. J.P. Morgan went and talked to Teddy Roosevelt and said, what have I done wrong? And are my other companies going to be affected? And Roosevelt said along the lines of, as long as you are not doing illegal things, you'll be fine. All right. Ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled that J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities was in violation of antitrust laws that had been strengthened since 1887. And Roosevelt would continue on this trust-busting ideology, right? Going after these bad trusts. He thought there were good trusts. He thought there were bad trusts, right? And he was the sole decision maker in it, which has its own problems. But Teddy Roosevelt kind of went after these trusts that he thought was practicing unfair business practices. And one thing that you will see is you'll see Teddy Roosevelt do a lot of things for the public and call it the square deal to give everyone a new start, a fresh start. And that's what his idea was. So that brings us to Microsoft. As you guys know, Bill Gates is the leader of Microsoft and has been for a while, and it's a company that we almost all use daily with the Windows operating system as being one of their flagship programs. Well, they became a computing giant after they focused on software. So, Bill Gates was going through learning computer science, and he decided to go after and get an operating system. IBM, which we're going to talk about next, had controlled the hardware market, and he knew that he probably didn't have a shot building computers because IBM practically held a monopoly over the computing industry, but he knew that they could get in there with the software. So he bought up a software system from the Seattle Computing Company and basically kind of fixed it to run on IBM machines. And in 1981, he launched MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, and it was the first Windows operating system put into place. And it would grow and grow and grow. It worked great with IBM. IBM controlled the market, and what you saw was a tremendous amount of growth taking place from that. Windows 3.0 was what really cemented Windows as getting ready to enter that monopoly. Windows 3.0 was that first new style user operating system with the graphical user interface like the mouse. And what you started to kind of see is clickable folders, something that we'd be a lot more used to today, whereas MS-DOS was a lot of command lines. So what you start to see is this program taking place, and this program, managing and cementing its position. All right, so with Windows 3.0, what you saw was the release of Word 3.0 and Excel 3.0. All right, the previous competition for those types of programs was Lotus and WordPerfect. Lotus was the number one selling spreadsheet, and WordPerfect was the number one selling word processor. But they both didn't know what Windows was about to do with this new operating system. So they still had that DOS user interface and looking at these products in a way that was not as exciting as these new Windows ones. So by the time Windows released the 3.1 Windows update, 70% of the PCs in the United States and in the world were running Microsoft. They're there. They've got it. 70% market share is a huge market share. What they do next is when they start to get in trouble. They started to kind of go after some other companies, and they started to try to purchase a company called Intuit. Intuit is the company that runs TurboTax and Mint.com, and they have QuickBooks. But basically, they tried to purchase that. The Department of Justice kind of said, "No, I don't think so. That's not a good thing." Microsoft continued down that path, and in Windows 95, they launched the Microsoft Network, MSN, and they kind of forced it into Windows 95. During the installation of Windows 95, all other internet service providers and web browsers would be disabled and no longer work on the machine. So that's a very, very monopolistic move on Microsoft's part. They definitely said, okay, well, if you're going to use the internet, you got to use our internet. You can't use somebody else's internet. You can't use American Online's internet. You can't use, CompuServe. You can't use Netscape. You can't use any of that stuff. So they all of a sudden no longer could you use what was there. This would ultimately become, Windows Internet Explorer. And what you saw with that Internet Explorer was all of a sudden, in order to get licenses for your machine to run on Windows, you had to bundle with it Internet Explorer. The Department of Justice thought that was too far. So they issued a big stay, and they said, okay, for every day that you continue to do this, we're going to charge you $1 million. And then they went to court. And Microsoft was brought to court and kind of ordered, after years of trial, many witnesses to break into two. All right, they had been found to have broken antitrust laws. And what happened with that is Microsoft said, well, we're not going to break into two, we're going to appeal. And ultimately, Microsoft got to stay as one company. But again, the groundwork was kind of laid they violated this antitrust law, and people started to lose a little bit of trust in Microsoft. Now, today, you have many different operating systems options. You got Linux, and within Linux, you have multiple types of operating systems. You have, the OS X's of Apple now. and you have your Windows, and you have some smaller ones as well. Plus, look at our mobile technology now. Is a desk, a tower, or a PC, or a laptop's maybe not even necessary. We start looking at things, and Microsoft would make that move with Windows 8.1 as they kind of went. Up next, I'd like to take a look at IBM. So, International Business Machines is what IBM stands for, and it was one of the first computing companies. So, they kind of got involved with some typewriters and cash registers to kind of do some simple math. And they were established in July 1911. And from July 1911 to 1990, IBM was pretty much 40 to 70% at any given time of the hardware market in the world for computers. They were a leader in innovation, and that's part of the reason why they stayed so ahead of the curve. They hired engineers that would look forward instead of backwards, and they would come up with what's the next big thing. And they came out with the IBM accounting machine, which you guys can see there. It's not little, but basically that would count, certain cards in a way and give the information out very quickly and save time. The semi-automatic ground environment was kind of a radar system that was used, and IBM would launch the first personal home use computer in 1981. I kind of have an understanding it was about $2,000 in 1981. So, some of our high-end computers come in, our high-end laptops come in today around $2,000. Right, here are some pictures of it. You guys can kind of see what they look like. And I put one more picture on there, and it's Watson. It's kind of like the latest thing. It's an artificial intelligence computer that can make decisions, and it's just the supercomputer that went on Jeopardy and actually did pretty well as a computer on Jeopardy, spitting out answers to questions. So pretty kind of cool stuff. So there was a barrier to entry in the hardware market, and it was very difficult to do. And basically, the antitrust lawsuit started in 1969, and they fought for 13 years. Right? They were never prosecuted. After 13 years and numerous judges, they were kind of, there's nothing here. You guys haven't proved it one way or the other. We're going to throw this case out. And that's what happened. But they kind of spent a tremendous amount of money defending themselves and being extra careful going forward. And what happened was these things kind of took away from some of their innovation and purchasing of other companies, which led to a loss of their market share, which is why, IBM, while still a huge partner and an important figure in business, is nowhere near as important as home computing as it was in the 80s. Right? With IBM today, you just kind of give you guys a perspective. They came out with the ThinkPad notebook and then sold the ThinkPad name to Lenovo and still kind of oversee that. But again, you're starting to kind of see that it's a little bit different. So ultimately, in closing, monopolies are legal in the United States, and that's really important to remember. Is there's nothing that says you cannot run a monopoly. It's just when you make it unfair is when you get involved. Mergers and acquisitions are constantly held up in court as the Department of Justice reviews to make sure that this is going to be safe for consumers. So you have a government agency that now regulates these mergers and acquisitions. One of the most recent big ones that we've seen was American and U.S. Airways. They kind of joined together as one company called the United or the American Airlines Group. And what that happened in 2013 was you started to kind of see this opportunity for this company to really kind of take a huge market share of domestic flights in the United States. And they wanted to make sure that things would still be fair for the employees of the company as well as us as citizens and consumers. All right, one thing that does not make a company do illegal business practices with a monopoly is just being better at what they do. You make a better car, you have better management. That doesn't make you a monopoly, and it doesn't make it illegal. So just kind of keep that in mind. At this point, there's a couple questions I'd like you to answer on the accompanying document. If you could take some time to answer those, I'd appreciate that. I look forward to seeing you guys, and have a wonderful day.